So now let's take a look at the players of the game. I'm not a chess player, but I know to be good at the game, you need to understand the pieces. You need to understand who the king is, what the queen does, the knight, and so on. So here we're going to take a look at who's in the courtroom and what role each person plays. Now let's talk interpreters. If I asked you, who's the most important person in the room, and you answered, the judge, technically you're right. The judge is the most important person in the room because he or she decides the case. And if I'm comparing the judge to a game of chess, I'd say the judge is like the king, but the interpreters are the queen. If you take away the interpreter, then most people would have no idea what's going on. If you lose the queen, if you lose the interpretation, you lose the game. Every time you appear in immigration court, the judge will ask you to raise your right hand and to swear to tell the truth. That's called an oath. Then the judge will ask you questions. Everything that you say will be recorded. You'll be speaking into a microphone that's on your desk. That microphone doesn't actually make your voice louder, it just records it. So if you say something at the first hearing, and then at the next hearing you say something different, it can and it will be used against you. So that's why it's so important that you understand the questions that are being asked of you. It's also important that what you speak is clear. Trust me when I say that immigration hearings can move quickly. Sometimes a judge has 80 cases to get through in a day. So you don't want to miss important information because when the recording is played back, you won't have time to explain to the judge why a piece of your case is wrong because of the interpretation. So who pays for an interpreter? The government does. That's how important it is for people to understand and participate in their hearings. The immigration judge has a responsibility to make sure that the hearing is translated to you in a language that you understand. But you can't bring your own interpreter. Interpreters are employed by the immigration court. They're neutral parties, and they swear an oath to interpret and translate accurately. But let's be clear, interpreters are human too, and they make mistakes. So if you speak a little English and you hear the interpreter make a mistake, maybe it's not exactly what you said, maybe they got the date wrong, it's best for you to repeat your answer. You don't want the recording to have any mistakes, especially if it's not something you actually said. Who tells the court what's your best language? The good news is, it's you. It's your responsibility to tell the court what your best language is. If it's Spanish, say it's Spanish. If it's an indigenous language like ma'am, tell the court that too. Don't let anyone pressure you into using Spanish because it's a close second and it's a more popular language. That only makes it easier to find an interpreter. This is a good time to let you in on a little secret. The court will do whatever's most convenient for them because remember those 80 cases? They want to finish them, but they want to finish them quickly. And switching interpreters takes time. But these are your rights, and you don't have to accommodate your rights for someone else's convenience. Because trust me when I tell you this, it won't buy you any extra points. What if I'm asked to waive interpretation? There are some times where a judge will just ask you not to use an interpreter. And there are many reasons why a judge will do this. And again, they're mostly done out of convenience to the court. If there is no interpreter in the courtroom, then the judge has to dial into a service, and that adds time. Sometimes there are connection issues and the call drops, and when you're dealing with 80 cases, that all adds precious minutes. Other times they have to track down an interpreter from another courtroom and hope that they're available. All these things just add extra time. I want you to remember something. The right to an interpreter belongs to you. So a judge shouldn't ask you to not use an interpreter, especially if you don't have a lawyer. But many judges will ask this, and many people say yes, especially when they have a lawyer. So what would you do if a judge asked you to waive your interpretation? I can't tell you what you should say, but I can tell you what I've seen. A lawyer once told a judge that he was waiving his client's right to interpretation. At the hearing, the judge explained to the lawyer, only in English, which documents the person should have at the next hearing. But by the next hearing, the lawyer had quit. And the person showed up to the hearing without a lawyer and without the documents that the judge had asked for. The person said that he didn't know about the documents because the lawyer never told him, and those expectations weren't translated to him. But the judge found that he was told what was expected of him, and he had waived his right to interpretation. And since he didn't comply with the judge's order, he was ordered deported. Understanding what's going on in your court proceeding is so important. When you know exactly what's happening, that gives you power. You can direct how you want your case to go. If you do have a lawyer, I would suggest you talking to him or her about interpretation, because it's your decision to make, not your lawyer's. And don't let anyone pressure you into waiving that right. It may feel uncomfortable to make a decision, especially when it's against what the judge wants. But an order of deportation is even more uncomfortable. If you choose to waive interpretation, make sure that your lawyer explains everything that has happened at that hearing. And when making your decision, I also want you to remember that you are the person that's bound by a deportation order, not your lawyer, not the judge. So don't make this decision for them. Make it for you. What if I speak English? I've had a lot of people ask this question. Should you use an interpreter if you speak and understand English? Let me give you some things to consider. Immigration court uses a lot of legal terms, and there may be things that you are not so familiar with in English. You might also just think better in Spanish. I know this happens to me. I would say I'm bilingual, but I think in English, and then I do the translation in my head into Spanish. And doing this sometimes makes me cut out words that I don't know, or words that I'm too embarrassed to try to say in Spanish. So it takes away from the meaning. The interpreter, on the other hand, translates exactly what you say. There will be times that you will have to testify for 2 hours or more. Plus, what you have to say can also be very difficult to talk about. So don't put extra pressure on yourself. If you can understand English and Spanish, then you get an extra moment to think about your answer because you get the information twice. With something so important at stake and in a system that gives you so little rights, why not use the ones you have?